Hello and welcome to Papers Past, the channel where we delve into old newspapers to discover what life in days gone by was really like. In this video we look at a time in the early 19th century when no grave was safe, from the people known as the Resurrectionists. Warning, this video is not for the squeamish. Okay, so today I'm looking at the Leicester Journal, dated 25th of August 1826, and I came across this rather disturbing ad. It starts with the heading £40 reward. Now, £40, to put things into perspective, would have been the equivalent of a year's wages for someone at the time. It goes on. A corpse having been taken out of a grave in the parish of Gilmorton in the county of Leicester by some evil-disposed person or persons. A reward of £40 is hereby offered. £20 from the rector of the said parish, and £20 from the church wardens and principal inhabitants of the parish of Gilmorton, to anyone who will impeach or cause to be brought to public justice the perpetrators of the above crime. Gilmorton Rectory, August the 22nd. Now, the village of Gilmorton lies south of Leicester and just north of Lutterworth. So why would anyone want to steal a body from here? Well, my guess is this. About 35 miles west of Gilmorton lies Birmingham, where only the previous year, in 1825, a new medical school had just opened, and medical students needed bodies. The second half of the 18th century and early 19th century had seen a much more scientific approach to the study of medicine and surgery, which was great news. However, the growing number of medical students and their mentors required an ever-increasing supply of corpses to dissect and study. Traditionally, the supply of corpses had been met by utilising the bodies of those hanged for their crimes. I found this article in a Salisbury Journal of 1827. The judge sums up proceedings. It was my intention to have you tried on Friday, that you might have the advantage of the intervening Sunday, but as this is the only remaining trial, I have no alternative but to take it. In pursuance of the course prescribed by law, I am bound to order you to be executed on Saturday, but in the exercise of the discretion with which I am invested, I shall respite you until Monday next. The judge then passed sentence pro forma that the prisoner be executed on Saturday, and his body given to the surgeons to be dissected and anatomized. But, in consequence of the promised respite, the execution will not take place until Monday. The fortitude of the prisoner did not forsake him when the awful sentence was pronounced, but a motion of his lips was observed, indicating the utterance of words which we hope was a prayer to the deity, responsive to that he had just heard from the judge, for mercy on his soul. For many criminals sentenced to death at this time, the fear of dissection was as great, if not greater, than going to the gallows. There was a widespread belief that you might not be resurrected if your body was not whole. In the 18th century, the punishment for almost any crime was death by hanging. It certainly made the judge's job a lot easier. So, happily for the medical schools, there had been a plentiful supply of corpses. However, by the early 19th century, lesser crimes, such as stealing a hat, were being commuted to transportation to the newly discovered colonies, the favoured destination being Australia. The supply of bodies began to dry up. Enter a new breed of entrepreneur, grave robbers, body snatchers, or as they were more euphemistically called at the time, resurrectionists. These gruesome gangs sprang up wherever there was a medical school willing to buy their grisly merchandise, and most medical schools were only too willing to play ball. The going rate for a corpse was between £8 and £10, so it was a highly lucrative business. Usually, acting on a tip-off, the gangs of typically around 3 robbers would creep into the graveyard by night, and using wooden spades, as they were quieter, dig down into the freshly dug grave. They would then break into the head of the coffin and haul the body out. The corpse would be then placed in a sack and then hurriedly carried away and delivered to the waiting customer. Legally speaking, the resurrectionists operated in a slightly grey area, as stealing a body was not technically illegal, as it didn't belong to anyone. For this reason, body snatchers who were caught were usually treated leniently by the law, who also, conscious of the needs of the surgeons, tended to regard the whole business as a necessary evil. The main worry for the grave robbers was if they were caught by angry relatives patrolling the burial ground, who would, no doubt, mete out their own form of justice. It was common for relatives to watch over the graves of the deceased for several days after the burial. I found this article in a Salisbury Journal of 1828, which refers to the recently dug grave of a Mademoiselle Verry, who seems to have been well known at the time, but alas, my searches have not thrown anything up on her. Mademoiselle Verry. The persecution of this young lady experienced during her lifetime, and which caused her premature death, would, we should have thought, ended in the grave. But not so. Even there she is not safe. On Saturday, information was given that a party of resurrectionists intended to make an attempt to carry off the body from St. George's burying ground, Bayswater, on that evening. In addition to the watchman who is in constant attendance at that ground, 3 extra watchmen were put on, and about 8 o'clock in the evening the beadles and constables repaired to the burying ground. In a short time 3 men were seen prowling near the burying ground, and from their manner of proceeding showed what their intentions were. After beating about for some time they retreated somewhat hastily, perceiving, it is supposed, that they were being watched. Scotland, having a large number of medical schools in Edinburgh and Glasgow, had a particularly serious problem with body snatchers, and went to great lengths to watch over and protect their graves. This watchtower in the town of Dalkeith was built particularly for this purpose. Other, more, shall we say, business-like devices were set up to deter robbers, such as these pistols which were attached to tripwires. Anything to deter the robbers was tried. Cages around the grave like this were common. Mortsafes, as they were called for obvious reasons, were specific devices designed to try to stop the resurrectionists getting at the coffin. These examples here feature a heavy stone lid mounted on a cage. Another type of mortsafe was this coffin made of iron. The idea was that the body would be removed once it had decayed, and then the iron coffin could be used by someone else. No state-of-the-art graveyard in the 1820s would be without one. As with any business, lucrative though it was, some allowance had to be made for losses. For example, if the body had, as one resurrectionist put it, gone putrid, and was therefore rejected by the surgeons. The same resurrectionist recalls in his diary that they had to hastily dispose of one corpse which appeared to have died of the smallpox. By the late 1820s, the demand for corpses by the medical schools seemed almost insatiable, and the number of resurrectionists had reached astonishing proportions. One estimate has it that in 1828 there were 200 resurrectionists operating in London alone. Things were starting to get out of control. In Edinburgh in 1828, the notorious mass murderers Burke and Hare were arrested and eventually convicted for murdering and selling their victims to a Dr. Knox for anatomical research. The public were horrified. Hare was eventually released for giving evidence against Burke, but Burke was hanged in front of a crowd of 25,000. Ironically, his corpse was publicly dissected and his skeleton was given to the Anatomical Museum of the Edinburgh Medical School, where it can still be seen to this day. But Hare and Burke had started a trend. The notorious London Burkers, John Bishop, Thomas Williams and James May, started out stealing freshly buried corpses. In his trial, Bishop admitted to having stolen between 500 and 1,000 bodies over a 12-year period. Apparently, inspired by Hare and Burke, they moved on to murdering innocent victims, who they drugged and drowned in a well before selling the corpses. They were arrested and Bishop and Williams were hanged before a crowd of 30,000, and their bodies were also sold for dissection. Afterwards, large crowds were admitted to view their remains. The public and the authorities had had enough, and the horrific murders carried out by gangs like the London Burkers helped push through the Anatomy Act of 1832, which effectively brought about an end to the activities of the Resurrectionists. From now on, only unclaimed bodies could be used for dissection. And where were they to be found? Well, prisons, hospitals, and that notorious Victorian institution immortalised by Dickens, the workhouse, home for paupers and orphans. Makes you want to throw yourself off the nearest bridge, doesn't it? Oh, and suicides.